clasped hands in supplication. At that I once more stopped. "Who are you?" I asked. "Ben Gunn," he replied, and his voice sounded hoarse and awkward like a rusty lock. "I'm poor Ben Gunn, I am, and I haven't spoken with a Christian these 3 years." I could now see that he was a white man like myself, and that his features were even pleasing. His skin, wherever it was exposed, was burned by the sun. Even his lips were black, and his fair eyes looked quite startling in so dark a face. Of all the beggar men that I had seen or fancied, he was the chief for raggedness. He was clothed with tatters of old ship's canvas and old sea cloth, and this extraordinary patchwork was all held together by a system of the most various and incongruous fastenings, brass buttons, bits of stick, and loops of tarry caskin. About his waist he wore an old brass-buckled leather belt, which was the one thing solid in his whole accoutrement. 3 years, I cried. "Were you shipwrecked?" "Nay, mate," said he, "marooned." I had heard the word, and I knew it stood for a horrible kind of punishment, common enough among the buccaneers, in which the offender is put ashore with a little powder and shot, and left behind on some desolate and distant island. "Marooned 3 years agone," he continued, "and lived on goats since then, and berries, and oysters. Wherever a man is, says I, a man can do for himself. But, mate, my heart is sore for Christian diet. You mightn't happen to have a piece of cheese about you now? No? Well, many's the long night I've dreamed of cheese, toasted mostly, and woke up again, and here I were." "If ever I can get aboard again," said I, "you shall have cheese by the stone." All this time he had been feeling the stuff of my jacket, smoothing my hands, looking at my boots, and generally, in the intervals of his speech, showing a childish pleasure in the presence of a fellow creature. But at my last words he perked up into a kind of startled slyness. "If ever you can get aboard again, says you," he repeated. "Why, now, who's to hinder you?" "Not you, I know," was my reply. "And right you was," he cried. "Now you, what do you call yourself, mate?" "Jim," I told him. Jim, says he, quite pleased apparently. "Well now, Jim, I've lived that rough as you'd be ashamed to hear of. Now, for instance, you wouldn't think I had a pious mother to look at me?" he asked. "Why, no, not in particular," I answered. "Oh, well," said he, "but I had, remarkable pious, and I was a civil, pious boy, and could rattle off my catechism that fast as you couldn't tell one word from another. And here's what it come to, Jim. And it begun with Chuck Farthen on the blessed gravestones. That's what it began with, but it went further than that, and so my mother told me, and predicted the whole she did, the pious woman. this I had a happy inspiration. I began to believe that I had found an ally, and I answered him at once. It's not Flint's ship, and Flint is dead, but I'll tell you true, as you ask me. There are some of Flint's hands aboard. Worse luck for the rest of us. Not a man with one leg, he gasped. Silver, I asked. Ah, Silver, says he. That were his name. He's the cook, and the ringleader too. He was still holding me by the wrist, and at that he gave it quite a ring. If you were sent by Long John, he said. I'm as good as pork, and I know it. But where was you, do you suppose? I had made my mind up in a moment, and by way of answer told him the whole story of our voyage, and the predicament in which we found ourselves. He heard me with the keenest interest, and when I had done, he patted me on the head. You're a good lad, Jim, he said, and you're all in a clove hitch, ain't you? Well, you just put your trust in Ben Gunn. Ben Gunn's the man to do it. Would you think it likely now that your squire would prove a liberal-minded one in case of help, him being in a clove hitch, as you remark? I told him the squire was the most liberal of men. Aye, but you see, returned Ben Gunn, I didn't mean giving me a gate to keep, and a shoot of livery's clothes, and such. That's not my mark, Jim. What I mean is, would he be likely to come down to the tune of, say, £1,000 out of money that's as good as a man's own already? I'm sure he would, said I. As it was, all hands were to share. And a passage home, he added, with a look of great shrewdness. Why, I cried, the squire's a gentleman, and besides, if we get rid of the others, we would want you to help work the vessel home. Aye, said he, so you would, and he seemed very much relieved. Now, I'll tell you what, he went on, so much I'll tell you and no more. I were in Flint's ship when he buried the treasure, he and 6 along, 6 strong seamen. They was ashore nigh on a week, and us standing off and on in the old walrus. One fine day up went the signal, and here come Flint by himself in a little boat, and his head done up in a blue scarf. The sun was getting up, and mortal white he looked about the cutwater, but there he was, you mind, and the 6 all dead, dead and buried. How he done it, not a man aboard could make out. It was battle, murder, and suddenly death, leastways, him against 6. Billy Bones was the mate. Long John, he was quartermaster, and they asked him where the treasure was. Ah, says he, you can go ashore if you like and stay, he says, but as for the ship, she'll beat up for more. By thunder, that's what he said. Well, I was in another ship 3 years back, and we sighted this island. Boys, said I, here's Flint's treasure. Let's land and find it. The captain was displeased at that, but my messmates were all of a mind and landed. 12 days they looked for it, and every day they had the worst word for me, until one fine morning all hands went aboard. As for you, Benjamin Gunn, says they, here's a musket, they says, and a spade and pickaxe. You can stay here and find Flint's money for yourself, they says. Well, Jim, 3 years have I been here, and not a bite of Christian diet from that day to this. But now, you look here, look at me. Do I look like a man before the mast? No, says you, nor I weren't neither, I says. And with that he winked and pinched me hard. Just you mention them words to your squire, and sometimes he would maybe think of his old mother. So be as she's alive, you'll say. But the most part of Gunn's time, this is what you'll say, the most part of his time was took up with another matter, and then you'll give him a nip, like I do. And he pinched me again in the most confidential manner. Then, he continued, then you'll up, and you'll say this, Gunn is a good man, you'll say. And he puts a precious sight more confidence, a precious sight, mind that, in a gentleman born than in these gentlemen of fortune, having been one himself. Well, I said, I don't understand one word that you've been saying, but that's neither here nor there. But how am I to get on board? Ah, said he, that's the hitch for sure. Well, there's my boat that I made with my 2 hands. I keep her under the White Rock. If the worst come to the worst, we might try that after dark. Aye, he broke out. What's that? But just then, although the sun had still an hour or 2 to run, all the echoes of the island awoke and bellowed to the thunder of a cannon. They've begun to fight, I cried. Follow me. And I began to run towards the anchorage, my terrors all forgotten, while close at my side the marooned man in his goatskins trotted easily and lightly. Left, left, says he. Keep to the left hand, mate, Jim. Under the trees with you. Here's where I killed my first goat. They don't come down here now. They're all mast-headed on them mountings for the fear of Benjamin Gunn. Ah, and there's the cemetery. Cemetery, he must have meant. You see the mounds. I come here and prayed nows and thens when I thought maybe a Sunday would be about due. It weren't quite a chapel, but it seemed more solemn-like. And then, says you, Ben Gunn was short-handed. No chapeling, no so much as a Bible and a flag, you says. So he kept talking as I ran, neither expecting nor receiving any answer. The cannon shot was followed after a considerable interval by a volley of small others, I suppose, and decided to sit quietly where they were and hark back again to Lily Bolero. There was a slight bend in the coast, and I steered so as to put it between us, even before we landed, with thus lost sight of the gigs. I jumped out and came as near running as I durst, with a big silk handkerchief under my hat for coolness' sake, and a brace of pistols ready brimmed for safety. I had not got 100 yards when I came on the stockade. This was how it was. A spring of clear water rose almost at the top of a knoll. Well on the knoll, and enclosing the spring, they had clapped a stout log-house, fit to hold 20 people on a pinch, and loopholed of musketry on every side. All round this they had cleared a wide space, and then the thing was completed by a paling 6 feet high, without door or opening, too strong to pull down without time and labour, and too open to shelter the besiegers. The people in the log-house had them in every way. They stood quiet in shelter and shot the others like partridges. All they wanted was a good watch and food, for short of a complete surprise, they might have held the place against a regiment. What particularly took my fancy was the spring, for though we had a good enough place of it in the cabin of the Hispaniola, with plenty of arms and ammunition and things to eat and excellent wines, there had been one thing overlooked. We had no water. I was thinking this over when there came ringing over the island the cry of a man at the point of death. I was not new to violent death. I have served His Royal Highness the Duke of Cumberland, and got a wound myself at Fontenoy, but I know my pulse went dot and carry one. Jim Hawkins is gone, was my first thought. It is something to have been an old soldier, but more still to have been a doctor. There is no time to dilly-dally in our work, and so now I made up my mind instantly, and with no time lost returned to the shore and jumped on board the jolly boat. By good fortune, Hunter pulled a good oar. We made the water fly, and the boat was soon alongside, and I aboard the schooner. I found them all shaken, as was natural. The squire was sitting down as white as a sheet, thinking of the harm he had led us to. The good soul, and one of the 6 forecastle hands was little better. There's a man, says Captain Smollett, nodding towards him, new to this work. He came nigh hand fainting, doctor, when he heard the cry. Another touch of the rudder and that man would join us. I told my plan to the captain, and between us we settled on the details of its accomplishment. We put old Redruth in the gallery, proceeded without pausing to take breath till the whole cargo was bestowed, when the two servants took up their position in the blockhouse, and I, with all my power, scullied back to the Hispaniola. That we should have risked a second boatload seems more daring than it really was. They had the advantage of numbers, of course, but we had the advantage of arms. Not one of the men ashore had a musket, and before they could get within range, for pistol shooting, we flattered ourselves we should be able to give a good account of a half-dozen at least. The squire was waiting for me at the stern window, all his faintness gone from him. He caught the painter and made it fast, and we fell to loading the boat for our very lives. Pork, powder, and biscuit was the cargo, with only a musket and a cutlass apiece for Squire and me and Redruth and the captain. The rest of the arms and powder we dropped aboard in 2 fathoms and a half of water, so that we could see the bright steel shining far below us in the sun on the clean sandy bottom. By this time the tide was beginning to ebb, and the ship was swinging round to her anchor. Voices were heard faintly hallooing in the direction of the 2 gigs, and though this reassured us, for Joyce and Hunter, who were well to the eastward, it warned our party to be off. Redruth retreated from his place in the gallery and dropped into the boat, which we then brought round to the ship's counter, to be handier for Captain Smollett. "Now, men," said he, "do you hear me?" There was no answer from the forecastle. "It's to you, Abraham Gray, it's to you I am speaking." Still no reply. "Gray," returned Mr. Smollett a little louder, "I am leaving this ship, and I order you to follow your captain. I know you are a good man at bottom, and I dare say not one of the lot of you is as bad as he makes out. I have my watch here in my hand. I give you 30 seconds to join me in." There was a pause. "Come, my fine fellow," continued the captain, "don't hang so long in stays. I'm risking my life and the lives of these good gentlemen every second." There was a sudden scuffle, a sound of blows, and out burst Abraham Gray with a knife cut on the side of the cheek, and came running to the captain like a dog to the whistle. "I'm with you, sir," said he, and the next moment he and the captain had dropped aboard of us, and we had shoved off and given way. We were clear out of the ship, but not yet ashore in our stockade. So I will leave it there for now. Next time we will read chapter 7, narrative continued by the Doctor, the Jolly Boat's last trip. This has been